So let's use an if statement in our program. And we can perfectly fit this into our while loop here. So there, I actually want to control what I want to do. Do I want to add a new value to our blockchain, or do I want to output the current blockchain? So to do that, I will actually first of all print something here. Please choose. And thereafter, I'll print the options. 1, if the user enters that, I want to add a new transaction value. And 2, if the user enters that, I want to output the blockchain blocks. So these will be the 2 options. Of course, just adding these print statements doesn't do anything though. Next, I need to fetch the user input. Now we got a get user input function already. It's only built to get new values for our blockchain though. So let's actually change this function a bit. I'll rename it to get transaction value because that is what we ultimately do here. We get a transaction value, we're fetching it here with your transaction amount please, and we're returning it. But now I'll also define a new function here, and I'll name it get user choice because this is the function I want to execute to allow the user to make a choice from these 2 options. So in there, I will also get my user input. I'm reusing that variable name, and that won't be any problem because it's a local variable here and it's a local variable here. Remember that scoping thing. And then again, I'll use input and I'll say your choice. And this allows the user to, well, make a choice. And then I return the user input. And of course, we could have written that code directly in the while loop. It's just a good practice to outsource something like that into a function so that we can keep our while loop focused and short. So now we have that get user choice function, and I want to execute this right after our print statement here. And we could also put that into a separate function, of course. So we got the user choice then stored in this user choice variable in the while loop. And now we need an if statement to decide what we want to do depending on the user choice. So I'll check if and then user choice. And now the question is, how do we write our logic here? If is the keyword. This defines that we're now entering an if statement, but how does the condition actually look like? For the condition, we need a Boolean operator. Remember Booleans? Booleans are true or false. But writing true or false like that in our code, as we do it in our infinite while loop, is rarely something we do. More often, we want to perform a conditional check in an if statement, for example. And for that, we need Boolean operators. And here you see the Boolean operators Python offers. We can check for equality, for inequality, that's the exclamation mark equal sign operator, for greater than and smaller than, greater and equal and smaller and equal, and we got these special is and in Boolean operators, to which I'll come back later. So with these Boolean operators, we can compare 2 values, and depending on the result, we'll get back true or false. So in our case here, we want to check if user choice equals 1, for example, because we're telling the user enter 1 if you want to add a new transaction value. So here we're checking if user choice is equal to 1, and this whole expression will in the end resolve to true or false, depending on whether the user choice was 1 or not. And then again, as in any other block statement, we enter a colon and use indentation to tell Python that the code which is indented belongs to this scenario, so to this first condition. So if the user choice is 1, then what? Well, then he wants to add a new transaction value, so we should get that value. I'll name it tx amount for transaction amount, and I'll execute get transaction value. And this will execute this function, which we renamed a second ago. So this is now our transaction value, which we're getting. Of course, I also want to add it to the blockchain. So what I'll do is, can remove that line, and now just execute add value with that transaction amount. So that's the first case. Now, of course, maybe the user also enters 2. So we should define a scenario or a handler for this too. We don't have to though. We can also just leave the if statement as it is and don't do anything if the value is not 1. It would then just go into the void and nothing would happen. If we want to have something happen on values different to 1, we need to define an else block. We also add a colon after that, and then again indentation to define which code belongs to the else block. So you don't have to add an else block, but if you do, whenever your condition here is not met, the code in the else block will execute. And in my case here, this is that I want to output the blockchain blocks. So here I want to perform this loop, and I will also put that into its own method to, well, have clean code. So here I will add a print blockchain elements function, add a colon, and add my loop in that function here. Make sure that the indentation is correct, that you're not doing something like that. It has to be indented to belong to that function. So now we got that print blockchain elements function. This is what I want to execute here in the else block. Now with that, the only thing I have to do if I save this is here where I get my initial amount. We renamed that function. It's not get user input anymore. It's get transaction value. So let's also rename it here. And now if I save this again, I can execute my file with Python blockchain. I'll enter my first value, and now we have to make a choice. And there we can enter 1. And now we're prompted to enter a transaction amount. And I will enter 5.3 here. And then again, we have to make a choice. And I can enter another transaction value. Please note that the blockchain wasn't output yet because that for loop didn't execute yet. So I choose 1 again and I enter 2.0. And again, I have to make a choice. And now I'll pick 2. And you see, I have to make a choice again, but in between, we actually did output our blockchain blocks because of the choice 2. This for loop, or this function in which the for loop sits, was executed. And now it goes on and on. We can't quit, so we still have to use Ctrl-Z for that, but this was a great first step. But what if we actually want to provide the user a cleaner way of quitting?